Welcome to the Holy Post. Nothing fires up the end times industry faster than America dropping bombs in the Middle East. After the president decided to attack Iran this weekend, YouTube has been flooded with convoluted and contradictory videos on the biblical implications of this war. But if this is really a prelude to Christ's return, as many online end-timers claim, why are they stoking panic and fear? Shouldn't Christians welcome this news? Then I talked to Senator Chris Coons about his faith and how it informs his politics, why he went to Divinity school, and what the Democrats can do to close the God gap in our politics. Also this week, courts have struck down the law requiring the Ten Commandments to be posted in every public school classroom, and we learn the real origin of honky-dory. A quick reminder that the majority of the content we produce here at HOLYPOST Media is exclusively for HOLYPOST Plus subscribers. That means if you like the HOLYPOST podcast, or Curiously Caitlin, or the Esau Macaulay Show, or any of the videos or social media content that we create, that is really just the tip of the iceberg. There is way more beneath the surface, but you need to be a HOLYPOST Plus subscriber to get it. So go to holypost.com to find out how you can join our community, access all of our content, along with live streams, exclusive merchandise, the HOLYPOST Book Club, and much more. Go to holypost.com to find out how. All right, here is episode 675.
Hey there, welcome back to the HOLYPOST podcast. I'm Phil Vischer. I am here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil.
And who's that? Who's that over there? I see you. Caitlin Shez.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Caitlin just finished her exams.
Yeah.
Woo!
Yes! I have to defend them. It's sort of anticlimactic because then you have to wait a week and a half and they grill you on them. But what I realized today, I will never again take a test like that, like a written test. Like if you have an academic career, you'll write papers forever. You'll have to do like oral things forever. I will never sit down and take a written test.
Well, what
again.
about when you start stacking up more PhDs on top of your PhDs?
See, I said this thinking people on the internet will find some. They'll be like, you have to take a driving test.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have to take an ordination test if I ever get ordained.
That's true.
But academically,
okay,
I think I'm done with tests.
Okay.
So that's a big deal.
I remember,
great.
I think it was my freshman year of college, walking out of my very last math exam that I would ever have to do. It's like,
done with math forever.
Oh, that was the best feeling.
Oh,
yeah.
Best feeling. Best feeling. Last week's theme song had kids in it.
It did.
And I didn't even know about it until I listened to it.
We smuggled them in under your nose.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Who are those children?
Who are those children? That's so cute.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, are we going to keep them there? Should we?
No, your voice is so nice, Phil.
But I have to change it anyway, so it's going to go away. So why not use the kids as the transition?
I think we can use the kids until...
Yeah, we'll use the kids until I fix it.
It's the already but not yet version of the theme song.
There you go.
Yes. Here's the transitory, transitional, liminal theme song.
The proleptic.
That's even better. I knew I was looking for a word like that. Here is our proleptic theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post.
And sometimes Kate
This episode is sponsored by Policy Genius. I got a life insurance policy almost 30 years ago when my kids were little. I wanted to know that they'd be okay if I were unexpectedly, well, not here. And it's been great knowing that that policy was always there, regardless of my income in any given year from my peculiar line of work. Just recently, I was wondering if I should rethink my life insurance and see what my options were today. So I reached out to Policy Genius. They aren't an insurance company, so they aren't trying to sell their own product. Instead, Policy Genius is a marketplace that helps you find and buy insurance. After filling out a simple online form, I got an immediate call back from Jason, who spent almost 40 minutes answering my questions and walking me through my options. He was great. No pressure to buy anything, just helpful info and recommendations with my needs in mind. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $276 a year for $1 million in coverage. It's an easy way to protect the people you love and feel good about the future. If you've been meaning to get life insurance but don't know where to start, this is your sign. Head to policygenius.com/holypost today. That's policygenius.com/holypost. Today's episode is sponsored by Sunday's Food for Dogs. We love our dog. Her name is Keena. We love to give her belly rubs, and she loves to patrol our backyard to make sure no squirrels break into our house to steal our valuables. We also love to give her Sunday's Food for Dogs. It's fresh, healthy dog food that's easy to store and serve. Most dog food is one or the other, either fresh and healthy or easy to store and serve. Because Sunday's is air-dried, it doesn't require refrigeration or prep. It comes right to our door so we never run out, and it's healthy food. Human-grade ingredients, 90% meat, 10% superfoods, 0% anything else. Folks who've switched their dogs to Sunday's notice health improvements like softer fur, fresher breath, and more energy. Keena loves Sunday's Food for Dogs, and we love that it keeps her healthy and strong so she can keep the squirrels from taking our stuff. Give it a try. Right now you can get 40% off your first order of Sundays. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/HOLYPOST or use code HOLYPOST at checkout for 40% off your first order.
Isn't that a heart condition?
I knew you were going to say something like that.
Palpitation, Skye.
It's like prolapse.
Palpitation.
No, not prolapse.
No, don't go anywhere with that. Mm-mm.
What?
You must stop.
There's a prolapse valve thing in your heart,
Maybe.
right?
Or
Okay, I don't know.
maybe it's something
I just
naughty
don't-
that we don't want to talk about.
Naughty? I don't think so.
know.
I just thought it was going in a gross
I
direction.
don't know where you were going with that. I don't know.
Maybe there's more than one thing that can prolapse.
Maybe there is. Well, if it's a verb, I'm sure you can make a lot of things do it.
Yeah, you can prolapse all over the place.
That's how verbs work.
What's the difference between prolapse and collapse?
When you prolapse, you go out. When you collapse, you go down. When you relapse, you go backwards. So it's the opposite of relapse.
Relapse, okay. Prolapse, yeah, there are many things can prolapse.
Listen, I told you.
I was thinking of mitral valve prolapse. The heart valve
and
bulges.
that is the only one we will think of.
There are other things.
Yes, there are.
Okay. All right. So we got a couple letters that I thought were interesting.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Thank you very much. Stephen wrote in. I don't know if you remember this, but for a few weeks, the phrase hunky-dory has been bouncing around.
Yes.
On the podcast.
I think I brought it up.
I thought we were done with it.
You were hunky-dory.
I was.
You were hunky-dory, and you said it was a 1950s phrase.
I think you said it was a 1950s phrase.
Oh. Okay.
Someone was wrong.
I were wrong. I'll take the fall, because I'm big enough.
Okay.
No.
This is from Stephen. In the previous couple of episodes, there's been conversation about hunky-dory and what would be the negative equivalent. As your friendly local logophile, I thought I'd help with some etymology. Etymology is the study of bugs. Hunky-dory, it's not. Just not. Hunky-dory actually dates back to the 1860s.
I see that. I looked it up right now.
Oh,
Not
stop
as
it. Stop it. Researching faster than I can read what has been sent in. The hunky part comes from the Dutch word honk, which means home. This was Americanized in New York to become hunk, to mean to be in a safe place, i.e. to hunker down. Hunker down and hunky-dory are related. Caitlin, can you believe that?
I'm shocked.
Are you paying attention?
Yeah, totally.
I've never looked over and seen a more disconnected look on your face than I saw.
Listen, I wrote exams for a long time this morning.
Over here. The dory part is a bit of a mystery, but most etymologists, people who study bugs, attribute it to duplication slang like hotsy-totsy or hoity-toity. Put together.
Oh, I love that. What was that slang?
Hotsy-totsy or hoity-toity.
No, what was the term for it?
Hotsy-totsy or hoity-toity. Oh, duplication slang.
Duplication slang.
Duplication slang.
Okay.
Like razzle-dazzle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's spend the rest of the episode coming up with more duplication slang examples.
I think it's going to go bad. That'd be my guess.
Only if you do prolapse. We're not going to do that. Put together hunky-dory. Oh, that's good. Put together hunky-dory, chunky monkey.
Itty-bitty.
It's an ice cream. Itty-bitty.
Yeah. This is turning into like a children's program. The word of the day is...
It's because of the new theme song.
Yeah.
It just sends us off in that direction.
Perfect.
Put together, hunky-dory means to be in a good or safe state of being. The first well-known use of it in this manner was on a Democratic political banner in 1864.
So it's demonic.
The
in
liberals.
1864. Well, it might have been the KKK in 1864.
Oh, dang.
No, there was no KKK in 1864.
But they were thinking about it.
That's the end of the Civil War.
But it was the guys.
Wars
It was the guys who were thinking about it, maybe.
Right.
But because the original hope was slang from the 1950s, I'd offer frosted, if you're angry.
Oh. Yeah.
Got the Zorros, if you're nervous.
Frosted.
Or simply
Frosted.
Low, if you're feeling sad.
Low.
Low.
Oh, we knew that one.
Someone else sent in a pickle. I'm really in a pickle, but that's in a jam, which is kind of the same thing also.
Pickled jam.
You can be in a pickle, you can be in a jam.
Yeah.
You can be in a tight spot.
Right. And you got to talk like this.
See? I'm in a jam, see?
Yeah.
How am I going to get out of here?
Wait a minute. Okay, so hunky...
You think you're so hoity-toity? Get me out of this jam, see?
Hold on. Hunky comes from the Dutch honk.
Yes.
For home.
Yes.
Can't dory be like door?
Come from
like
finding
the door
Dory.
to your home? I'm hunky-dory? Like I'm
No.
going through the door home?
I like how you're
think
offering
so.
your own, like you're like, can't it be that?
Yes.
Couldn't I decide?
Sure.
That's not how words work.
I know, but
Skye.
not
this
how
is
words
how
work.
but this is how evangelical Bible studies go. Right?
Yes.
Everyone just offers their own interpretation. It's all equally valid regardless of scholarship or
Let
history.
me tell you,
Couldn't Paul
that's not evangelical.
really mean? Wouldn't it be? Barb sent in a letter in response to, because we were talking about protesting, and is it easy to protest, if everyone around you agrees with you? And what's it like to protest where people don't agree with you? Are we really willing to do that? And Barb said, thank you so much. I actually love this letter from Barb. Thank you, Barb. Thank you so much for all you do. God is truly using you to keep me grounded and hopeful in these wild times. You raised an interesting point this week, the fact that you cannot fathom what it is like to protest in an environment that is largely opposed to what you're protesting. I'm happy to share this vantage point with you. I live in the reddest county of the reddest state in the U.S.
Wow.
In the beautiful state of Wyoming, where nearly 88% voted for the Trump-Vance ticket in 2024. In our county, you are nearly unelectable if you're not endorsed by the local Freedom Caucus. I'm also an immigrant, a legal one, so many discount my voice because, well, they're not talking about me when they're talking about immigration. After all, I did it legally. I'm white, and I moved here from a tiny, super privileged country in Europe that is famous for cheese and chocolate.
And her name's Barb.
Yeah.
So it's either Switzerland or France, I'm guessing.
Tiny.
Switzerland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we're guessing. Barb, that's what we're guessing.
I love Switzerland. It's a great place.
Tell us if we're wrong. I'm now last Saturday, I protested for the first time ever. After all, I grew up in evangelicalism as a lay pastor's kid in a small Anabaptist denomination, voted conservative all my life, and believed Democrats were from the devil. I am now in my mid-50s, and I cannot be quiet and comfortable anymore. At the protest, the counter-protesters showed up in jacked-up pickup trucks adorned with Jesus is King flags, revving their engines during speeches, yelling Bible verses into a megaphone, and doing Nazi salutes along the streets.
One of these things does not go with the others.
What? The megaphone? Yeah, Jesus didn't have electricity.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Our protest was barely 200 people in a county of 35,000. My real-life friends in church or work will never mention the protest. It's silence. They think that I went off the deep end to the dark side. My husband is a church elder, so they may not question my salvation quite yet, although I have gotten pretty quiet. Protesting here makes me wonder all the time if I'm on the right side of history because the voices to the contrary are so very loud. Loud, but hateful. And the loudest are other believers. That's why I'm so thankful for the Holy Post. It shows me a Christianity I want to be a part of.
I'm thankful for Barb because
Thankful for Barb.
that takes courage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Barb, you got chocolate, you got cheese, you got guts.
Mm-hmm.
Probably bagels too. That was an inside joke. I apologize, Barb.
That was pre-show joke.
Pre-show joke. Yeah. It's impressive to see people who are taking stands who have never taken stands before. It was like, this is America. It's fine. It's fine. I'm fine. You're fine. We're fine. Everything's fine.
To protest where you are a extreme minority and to do it peacefully, to do it respectfully, but to do it with courage and conviction, that's an amazing combination.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we don't have to spend more time on that.
But anyway,
I'm impressed.
I appreciate that, Barb. Thanks and send us some chocolate. I like chocolate.
You're asking her for something.
Can I send you some chocolate, Barb? You probably miss your home.
She probably wants it.
I'll go to Aldi, get some European chocolate.
If she is from Switzerland and now she's Wyoming?
Yeah.
Is that where she's
very similar?
There's mountains.
Stuff.
Yeah.
It's a much bigger place.
Bigger, yeah. And it's picturesque, but it's a different kind of picturesque.
Yeah, but mountains.
Okay. Over the weekend, we bombed Iran.
Don't say we.
America.
Dude, can we say we?
America?
I think we might have to.
I can't say that I'm not a part of America and that I don't, know.
These are things that always get weird because it's like the we language.
Yeah, we won World War II.
Yeah, I didn't have any role in that.
No, of course not. But, the Bears won the Super Bowl. We won!
Yeah.
It's what is that called?
It's interesting. Like, we want to include ourselves in the positive things, but we never want to include ourselves in the negative things.
Right, exactly. That's why I'm including me in a negative thing, Skye. So quit your griping.
Okay, no, all right.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Oh, no, I didn't do that, but I did end slavery. Thank you very much. Mark Driscoll released an 85-minute video explaining the implications of Trump bombing Iran on End Times Prophecy. Russell Moore wrote a piece for CT about how we really need to resist the urge to explain the implications of Trump bombing Iran on End Times Prophecy.
Here's the funny part.
Yeah.
I don't have that urge.
No.
I'm not tempted.
But
you're medicated.
But in the 80s I did because everyone was doing it. It was like in the water in the 80s.
I did not know it was 85 minutes. I saw a 10-minute version. It must have been edited or something.
I think he's actually put out a bunch of videos since the conflict started with Israel and Iran.
Oh my gosh.
But now there's this 80-minute plus one. And I did skip around and watch some of the videos and I'm confused. I'm honestly confused.
Most of these guys that did this professionally in the first wave, the Tim LaHaye's, who was the guy that was most famous for it? I forget, but have died in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. So I kind of doubted that there would be a new generation of
there's a market
of end time speculators, but it appears
there's a market.
Hal Lindsey.
Well, he died. Yeah, he died.
I think that's who you were thinking of. That's all I was saying.
No,
and then there's John Hagee.
Oh. Yes, John Hagee is who I was thinking of. Because Lindsay wasn't as active recently. He didn't do a weekly TV show where he would just say, here's what happened in the news this week and here's how it fits.
Here's the part I don't get.
It's not hunky-dory, see? It's the Russians. They're Gog and Magog and they're coming for us. See?
I will freely admit that I did not watch the 85-minute video in its entirety. I skipped around and I watched some of his other videos, which were shorter.
What's his point?
Well, this is what I don't understand is, has Mark Driscoll become a dispensationalist?
That's a good
Because
question.
a lot of what he's saying sounds dispensationalist-y.
Yeah.
Which he made his bones as an outspoken Calvinist.
Yeah.
And
Skye.
He was.
I know, but there's a whole world where those two things go together.
Really?
Oh.
I don't know that word.
Are there Calvinists at DTS?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know
they
these
pick
things.
only the predestination part of Reformed theology and leave most of the rest of it aside. But
that's the part, Mark Driscoll was tight with
Piper
and all those guys. And I'm like, that.
But he was always Baptistic, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So I just think once you're in the world of I'm picking and choosing from all the things, you're going to keep picking and choosing from all the things.
Can I read a quote from one of his videos?
Sure. Wow. I didn't know you'd done research.
I wrote this down because this kind of captures another part of my confusion.
Okay.
So this is a quote from him. He says, "Exactly what Islam wants is the battle of Armageddon, to quote Revelation, or the battle of Gog and Magog, to quote Ezekiel 38 and 39. And so you can't allow that to happen. Those two wars in the Bible trigger the second coming of Christ because the nations surrounding Israel would finally succeed in their determined effort in perpetuity to eradicate the nation of Israel."
We can't allow the second coming of Christ?
Yes, that's my question. He goes on.
This is the same thing we've always said, though.
I know, but this is the part that makes no sense to me is he's talking about this possibly being the end times, that it's going to trigger Armageddon. And we can't allow that to happen.
Because then Jesus would come back.
Which is the part.
And I've got some stuff to do. I got laundry to pick up next week.
I don't understand. And Caitlin, you're right. This is the bigger problem with this whole prophecy end time subculture is that simultaneously scaring the living daylights out of people about the end times. But if you read the New Testament, the church is excited for the end times because it means the restoration of all things and the return of Jesus and the destruction of your end. So how can these people be both simultaneously terrified and prophesying that this is it doesn't fit.
I mean, this is how Lindsay's later books are explicitly doing the same thing, where they're like, okay, here's the different international players, here's how they fit. If these people go to war, then that's the end times. But then also saying the Bible is telling us we need to increase the U.S. military budget to prevent those countries from going to war. Because if they go to war, it will only escalate, and we don't want nuclear war. And it's like, I, in normal circumstances, do not want nuclear war. But in your telling, the nuclear war is what brings Christ back. So I'm down all of a sudden. I'm confused.
We won't see Jesus until after the zombie apocalypse. So I'm not going to wear a mask.
The refrain, the very end of the Bible is "Come, Lord Jesus," right? It is a longing for Jesus to return and make all things new. And yet the message from these people is, we don't want him to come because it's going to be awful and terrifying and everything's going to be bad. And so they need the fear to grow their audience and bring in the donors and sell the books and get the videos. They need that fear. But the message of the New Testament is, do not be afraid.
Yeah.
Especially of the second coming. Like, you should rejoice at the second coming. So this seems completely bonkers.
Yeah. Do you think the success of the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast helped Mark Driscoll come back by keeping him,
I don't know,
front and center?
It's a good question. It does add to his persecution complex.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So in that regard,
and people love someone who's persecuted.
Some people do.
And here's, because I wonder, okay, he screwed up so badly and made such a huge mess and hurt so many people, and now he's back and he's doing great. It's kind of like Jimmy Bakker. You know, he's screwed up so badly, he went to jail, but now he's back and he's in ministry again, and he's just following.
It's a great redemption story.
Also, a lot of it is that these are really charismatic leaders.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know,
little c.
Well,
in some cases,
big C. Jimmy Bakker,
right?
Jimmy Bakker, both.
Sometimes both.
Yeah, right.
But there is, so there is that. If you are a big C charismatic leader, you'll go with a spiritual warfare narrative immediately.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got an audience that's been trained, kind of Pavlovian response to spiritual warfare narratives. Mark Driscoll wasn't a spiritual warfare guy as much.
He benefited from the weird swings we've had around masculinity and gender, where it's like when he was first really popular and his vibe was less like really kind of like some of the manosphere stuff that's now, but just sort of a like, get your life together, have responsibility, like kind of tough and like some toxic masculinity stuff, but not that much. That was really popular. The cookies are done.
Phil screwed up the timer.
All right, let me see where we're at right now, too.
Where are we? The cookies are done.
That was quick.
So his first wave, he's not doing as much of the like toxic masculinity stuff. He's more just a light version of that. Like, get your life together, a little bit of like the Jordan Peterson, like make your bed, have responsibility,
tough
like
love,
do that.
light.
And that was popular with men at the time.
Yeah.
By the time he comes back around and is like relaunching a church, and
the second
Rise and Fall of Mars Hill
Driscoll
is bringing him,
my new
the second
podcast.
coming of Mark Driscoll. Suddenly we have the Manosphere. Suddenly we have Andrew Tate, and we like the idea of just the vibe. It's like, I was watching one of those videos he made and I was like confused as you were, Skye, about what he was even saying. But I was also struck by, if someone ran into that on YouTube and they didn't know anything about the church, they didn't know anything about Mark Driscoll or the background or Young Restless Reformed or anything, there's a certain subset of people who have been primed to just see this guy with the beard, with the background, the podcast mic, in the kind of tone that he's using, and just are into a guy who sounds and looks like that. So he's benefited from like, if he had been doing that when he first started, that was not so popular. Now it's suddenly popular again, and he fits right in.
One of the videos I saw, he was wearing a hat, black hat. That, did you see this? And it was on the hat it said, "More fathers, less government."
Oh, there you go. What? More fathers.
Yeah.
Like I need to have more than one father, like two fathers. Like, is he for gay marriage now? What is that?
But it's actually a brilliant bit of branding.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like Make America Great Again.
Yeah.
Right.
You pull in the libertarians and you pull in the very conservative,
vaguely Christian-y.
Right.
Yeah.
It's conservative in its political outlook. It's pro-family. It's pro-masculinity. It's all of those things.
I
in
do
one little
think,
slogan.
and we can talk about this later because I've been doing a bit of a dive into some subject matters. But the influence of mid-20th century libertarianism on evangelicalism in America is enormous.
Yeah. I can hear the audience rushing to the podcast, Phil.
I'm not going to title it that. Okay. I'm going to come up with a pithy, provocative
You should do a paper at a conference with that title,
Phil. I don't do papers. I do. What do I do?
Talking.
I do talking.
I do talking.
And puppets.
And people love talking. They hate papers. Okay. We're not going to get into like the politics of bombing Iran. Right. That's not really our thing. It's not our lane.
I did appreciate Russell Moore's thing though about don't make this about eschatology. It's not helpful. But
I think with most things, we need to first and foremost make them about people before we make them about ideas or forecasts or outcomes, because there's people involved. And boy, is that true in Gaza. And I'm also worried about, all the news from Iran blinding us to the fact that there's mass starvation headed for Gaza because people can't get food. That's a larger humanitarian issue right now than whether or not Iran is going to lob some missiles at military bases. Okay. I see you have nothing to say about that.
No, I don't want to go deeper down the political rabbit hole.
No, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. Louisiana's speaking of political rabbit holes, Louisiana's 10 Commandments law is ruled unconstitutional according to an appeals court. The law. A federal appeals court on Friday found that a Louisiana law was plainly unconstitutional for requiring the 10 Commandments to be displayed in every classroom of the state's public schools and universities, and agreed with a lower court's decision to block it. And here's the interesting thing. It was the Fifth Circuit. The most conservative circuit. That's Texas.
That's Texas,
yeah,
right.
Texas, Louisiana. It's the most conservative circuit in the country.
Okay, but don't you think the people who passed this law in Louisiana knew this, and they want this to go up the chain to get the case into the Supreme Court so that they can have this battle? Yeah, but the Supreme Court has been smacking down the Fifth Circuit for the last 2 years. So the Fifth Circuit is if you listen to like David French and his Sarah Isgur
and their podcast,
advisory opinions.
The Fifth Circuit has been overreaching and getting, in some cases, kind of surprisingly strong language back from the Supreme Court,
which is a conservative court.
Yeah. So the notion that the Fifth Circuit would say, this doesn't pass muster, and the Supreme Court would say, oh, yes, it does, actually, because we're more conservative than you are. No, they ain't.
Right. It's done. It's not going to make it to the Supreme Court.
But Texas just passed the same law last week.
But
so now that one's going to go to court and get ruled unconstitutional.
Good. Yeah. It should.
Are you saying you don't want...
Yes, I am.
And here's why it was ruled against. The judges pointed out that the posters must be indiscriminately displayed in every public school classroom in Louisiana, regardless of class subject matter. So they couldn't say it had an educational application to every subject.
Does it need to be in the gym?
Every class.
Honestly, that's probably where it's most relevant.
Gym's a class.
Also, the people who were promoting the law were saying this has nothing to do with religion. It's just about history. We just want kids to see the history. The judges referred to statements by proponents that revealed a religious motivation rather than one rooted in teaching students legal history. The court's decision quoted the law's primary author, so this isn't someone off to the side, this is the primary author of the law, saying, it's so important that our children learn what God says is right and what he says is wrong. And that's probably what made it a unanimous decision that you can't do this.
There's probably...
You can't do this.
Etsy poster maker people all over Louisiana who are just distraught today.
Well, they can still make their posters. Only one.
Actually, they might be getting more business right now.
Yeah.
But they can't put them up in the classroom.
No, they can't. But you can put them up everywhere else in protest. Everywhere else. Every street sign, everywhere.
This again, people seem unaware of the contradictions, but the same folks who hold up America as some kind of divinely ordained country and the Constitution as some kind of divinely inspired document then get upset when that same Constitution doesn't allow them to put up the 10 Commandments, and they consider it persecution when the courts rule against them. And they did not see the contradiction here.
Yeah.
It seems self-evident to me, but
Caitlin?
My frustration with this is I really love the idea, and I'm very in support of the idea that we should talk about the 10 Commandments in public schools, in the sense that religious history is a good thing for kids to learn in public schools, in the sense that American political history has been deeply shaped by Christian ideas, including biblical texts. And I don't think that out of a desire to prevent religious instruction in schools, we should keep them out of there. But as you have said, and is obvious from this piece, it's this is done with a kind of culture war mentality, and with the idea that we're teaching Christian morality to students in the public school.
We're teaching kids what God approves of and doesn't approve of. And if you say that out loud, I think you're done in court.
And here's the theological concern I have with that, regardless of the legal concern, which is that in Scripture, when the law is given initially, and then when it is referenced, when it is repeated, it is always in the narrative context of who the people of God are and what God has already done for them. Like it says in Deuteronomy, when it's talking about teaching the children your law, it begins with, I brought you out of Egypt. I brought you out of slavery. And so these are the commands that you are to follow, to teach to your children, to keep in your homes and wear on your body. All of that has to do with this relationship that God has with his people. And there's a wonderful theologian, Oliver O'Donovan, who talks about how every command in Scripture starts with the reasoning that is always in the context of this story. So every command starts with therefore, or because before that is an account of who God is and who God's people are that gives context and meaning to what that command is. So there's this weird, not Christian motivation behind this, which is to separate those commands from the context of who the people of God are and what God has done. And there's a long history of this, of Christians thinking we can kind of divorce these moral precepts or commands from their narrative context, and it never goes very well for us because it doesn't make sense apart from them.
But Caitlin, I think it's partly because this story and the one in Texas as well, this idea of putting the 10 Commandments up in public school classrooms is not about the story of Scripture. It's about Christians marking their territory.
Right. They don't actually want them to learn what God says.
Exactly. They're saying we're going to put these posters up in these classrooms to show that we Christians have dominance in this school. And God's going to look on these schools and these classrooms and see his commandments on the walls, and he's going to smile and be happy about it because we see God as some kind of tantrum baby in the sky that can't handle the fact that America doesn't have his commands in the classroom. So we're going to do that for him. And because of that, he's going to like us more and bless us with greater prosperity. And all of that is antithetical to the narrative of Scripture that you just referenced as the context for the 10 Commandments.
I want to give a slightly more charitable take on these people's motivation, which is to say that I do think
for the charitable take,
I do think some of it is definitely what you just said, Skye. I do think there's this other impulse, which is it's just me taking back what I just said, which is they do genuinely want people to know what God says is right and wrong. But it's a wrong idea of how that is formed in people that exists in our churches too, right? We have this mentality sometimes where we're just pastors ask me all the time to come preach a single sermon on political theology, that's gonna just fix the congregation. Because if I just give them the right ideas, bam, they'll act rightly. And it completely ignores the way that they're formed and shaped, the way that their loves and loyalties are oriented. It's just if you have the right ideas, you'll do the right things. And I do think some people have a genuine desire. They see different news sources than you and I see, and they're very convinced of the moral decline of this country, which is a repeated theme in this country's history. And they're trying to figure out how to do something about it, and they feel like they can't fix it. But if they could just get God's law in these public schools, then people would know what God said and they would act differently. And I think that's completely not what will happen. But I do think there are a lot of people, especially the the moms that get pulled into these groups to advocate for these things, and like the people who share the things on Facebook. Like maybe the architects of the law do not have the most pure motivations, but I think a lot of the people that get kind of whipped up into a fervor over this are people who are like, I want to see a more moral country. This feels like something we could do to make that happen.
Okay. To play devil's advocate, though, these same people I'm assuming are part of church communities. It's like, well, start there. The church has the scriptures. The church is teaching the scriptures. If the people in the church are not obeying these commandments, why would you expect the people outside to do it?
If you believe, because you've been told your entire life, that everything I don't like about America today is because the Bible was taken out of public schools.
Right. So then look at the places where the Bible still is present and go, are they following it?
That's not.
I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying they can have a good motivation for this that is misguided.
I understand the rationale, Phil. And I'm not.
Yes, clearly we preach the Bible in my church, but it is not enough.
Well,
because look.
I know, but even if you just look within the church, knowledge alone is not transformative.
A few bad apples.
And then the other piece of this, like it reminds me of circumcision.
Oh, no.
Of course.
Why?
No, because in the New Testament, there's a big battle in the church about circumcision. And it was obviously a huge symbol of Jewish identity and fidelity to God and his covenant. Yeah. And Paul says neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love. And so posting the 10 Commandments or not posting the 10 Commandments means nothing if you don't have faith manifested in love.
Put my commands on your doorposts and teach them to your children.
So do that. Do that in your home. Do that in your church. Do that in your community. But simply posting it for non-believers to read doesn't do anything apart from the larger narrative, as Caitlin was saying, and apart from the witness of God's people actually living this out.
And the indwelling of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
You don't think the Word of God has power?
With the Spirit.
On the wall in a little frame?
That wouldn't be, you know what?
If
there was a law that said you had to have some passage of the Bible up on every wall in America, I wouldn't choose the 10 Commandments.
That is true. That's a good point.
It's not the one I would go with.
What would you choose?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Sermon on the Mount. How about the whole Sermon on the Mount?
I think that's
the whole Sermon on the Mount.
Well,
how about the Lord's Prayer?
It's a little long. Yeah. I feel like that requires explanation.
Well, 10 Commandments don't.
See, this is what we've been saying. It all requires
explanation. But which one's going to, whatever, I don't want to.
Oh, man.
Probably like a woe to the rich.
There's a piece woe to the rich under a Eat the Rich poster.
You'll fade away like a wildflower. Woe to the rich
because we're coming to eat ya. Hey, Stephen, thank you for sending in your etymological report. And hey, Barb, really appreciate your story about standing with a sign in red, Wyoming. And we have a great guest, so hang out for the guest. And we appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
The Holy Post is sponsored by BetterHelp. We are living in crazy times, and that can be hard on your mental health. Plus, relationship stress, parenting, marriage, and work stress, it all adds up. Well, don't try to handle all this on your own. You can get help from trained professionals. But the economy and tariffs and the price of eggs, adding therapy onto all that feels like a huge investment, and the cost of traditional in-person therapy can be huge, costing anywhere from $100 to $250 per session. Online therapy with BetterHelp can save you, on average, up to 50% for each session. BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people around the world. It's easy, too. You can join a session with the click of a button to help fit therapy into your busy life. And you can switch therapists at any time. You can do better than just survive these crazy times. Your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/HolyPost today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/HolyPost. Today's episode is sponsored by Our Place. You're trying to eat healthy, right? Are you trying to cook healthy? I mean, is your cookware part of the problem? most cookware still contains harmful forever chemicals, where a single scratch on a non-stick coated pan can release 9,000 particles of plastic into your food and into you. Our Place makes high-performance, toxin-free cookware. You can cook without worrying that the coating on your pan is going to end up in you. Plus, the cookware from Our Place is gorgeous. Great design, awesome colors. You've got to check it out. Our Place has a 4-piece cookware set that can overhaul your entire kitchen. The set includes 2 multifunction always pans and 2 perfect pots in mini and full sizes that replace a whole stack of cookware, and buying them together saves you $150. So stop cooking with toxic cookware and upgrade to Our Place today. Visit FromOurPlace.com/HOLYPOST and use code HOLYPOST for 10% off site-wide. With a 100-day risk-free trial and free shipping and returns, you can experience this game-changing cookware with 0 risk.
My guest today is Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. Senator Coons was first elected to the Senate in 2010, and he got on my radar because I learned that he's the only sitting senator with a Divinity degree. I was intrigued by that and thought it would be really interesting to talk to him about his journey from seminary to the Senate and how his faith informs his political service. After this interview was scheduled a few weeks ago, I started doing my homework about Senator Coons and came up with a wide slate of topics that I was hoping to discuss with him. But when we finally sat down and actually spoke last Wednesday, circumstances had changed a lot, and so did my topics. Senator Coons serves on the Foreign Relations Committee, so I wanted to ask him about the war between Israel and Iran, and we did talk about that, but we spoke before the US entered the conflict by striking Iran's nuclear facilities this past weekend, so that's why that doesn't come up in our conversation. Also, because of the craziness around the war last week, Senator Coons was very pressed for time. Normally, we schedule interviews to be at least an hour with our guests, and then we take some of that for the show and some for a bonus segment and some just for off-the-record conversation. But my time with the senator got cut down to 30 minutes, and then by the time he actually sat down for the interview, he told me he only had 15 minutes, so it kind of got crunched. Thankfully, he ended up sitting a bit longer than that, but with such a small window, I had to cut a lot of the issues that I was hoping to cover with him. Still, I think Senator Coons had some interesting things to say about the Democratic Party, its recent failures, and why voters of faith are still moving toward Donald Trump and the Republicans, and how Democrats can do a better job at welcoming them and engaging them. I still hope to have Senator Coons back on for a longer, more in-depth discussion, but for now, here is my abbreviated conversation with Senator Coons. Senator Coons, welcome to the Holy Post.
Thanks. It's great to be on with you.
Before we get into some of your story and how you see your faith as a political leader, I can't ignore events that are unfolding right now in the world. I want to give you a chance to respond to that. It's, as we're recording this, about 6 days into the current conflict between Israel and Iran. The Trump administration has been sending mixed signals at best, although the president...
that's a very generous way of characterizing a chaotic series of tweets and posts and statements. I can't discern where they're headed.
Well, it seems like the president seems to be signaling some greater U.S. participation in this conflict. You are a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. How do you see this thing unfolding, and what would you advise the president in this circumstance as far as U.S. involvement in this current conflict?
So first, I'm working with a group of other Democratic senators on a letter I am trying to finalize and send to the president today to essentially say this: if nothing else, you owe the Congress a classified briefing on your strategy, the threats to U.S. service members and citizens in the region, the costs and risks of whatever it is you're contemplating. The letter, as I've drafted it, makes clear a preference on my part for de-escalation and a negotiated resolution to Iran's nuclear program, but also reasserts that it is a threat. It's a threat to Israel. It's a threat to the United States. The G7 just put out a unanimous statement that Iran should never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, and is clearly, built and is running a program largely designed towards that goal. And that Israel is an ally and partner of the United States that deserves our defense. Nevertheless, we find ourselves now in a moment where Israel has gone ahead, acted without the United States' knowledge or active support, And Prime Minister Netanyahu at this moment is asking President Trump to either give to Israel or use on Israel's behalf unique military capabilities we have that could destroy the Fordo enrichment facility that's literally underneath a mountain. My point in talking to the press just a few minutes ago was that mountain isn't going anywhere. There is no reason why our president in the next few days or week can't come to Congress, have his military advisors and intelligence leaders brief us on why they think this is necessary, and have a shared conversation about the risks and costs, and then have us vote, because Congress authorizes going to war, not the president. In any event, my friend and colleague, Senator Tim Kaine, had previously filed a war powers resolution that will come up for a vote next week. The way it's framed presumes that we're already putting American troops in harm's way in Iran, and sort of removes the authorization for that. I voted for a very similar resolution that Tim offered back, I think, in 2020. Senator Kaine has long been involved in a, I think, appropriate tug of war with different administrations about reinforcing Congress's constitutional and special role in declaring war, rather than just using our appropriations to defund or send signals of disapproval.
Well, it is a much larger topic of Congress surrendering its constitutional responsibilities to the executive that we don't have time to get into. But before we leave the topic of foreign relations, there are a growing number of Americans on both sides of the aisle, but especially those who are supporters of the president, who disagree with America's involvement in global affairs. They want to be disentangled from what they see as forever wars. They've been outspoken against U.S. support of Ukraine, for example. They don't see U.S. having a role in Israel's war in Gaza, and now this conflict with Iran. What do you say to Americans who want to disengage from foreign policy and from basically the world that we helped create post-World War II? Why should we still care about the rest of the world and not just focus on ourselves at home?
So first, if we ignore the world will come to us. And the cost to the United States of abandoning our long alliances and partnerships, our programs, whether feeding the hungry or combating pandemics, whether working with our NATO allies to push back on Russian aggression against Ukraine, or working with our allies in the Pacific to forestall or prevent a PRC invasion and occupation of Taiwan. In previous periods, when the United States has said, that's not our problem, we've got two big oceans, we're fine, developments in the world have spiraled in directions that we really did not like. So a few simple points, if I could. First, and I do hear from constituents with this view, I think their view more generally is, don't waste trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives in dumb wars that don't have a clear strategy or an agreed upon end state or an outcome. And it is important that we be respectful of those Americans who volunteered and served and sacrificed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's important to be reminded that an unprovoked attack on the United States by al-Qaeda is largely what propelled us into those conflicts. But the war in Iraq was a huge strategic blunder. We began that war in 2002 by toppling Saddam Hussein and his armed forces based on flawed information and intelligence that he had some weapons program, a WMD program that he ultimately didn't. And we then end up owning 8 years of chaos and violence. And ultimately it gave birth to ISIS. And we had to go back in a second time to Iraq, and we still have troops there today. The war in Afghanistan, I think, was more directly related to an attack on the United States by al-Qaeda, but we ended up in a nearly 20-year mission of nation building when there was not a nation there to be built. And so I hear the opposition to our engagement in the world as opposition to costly, purposeless, wasteful engagement in the world. My particular area of passion for a long time has been foreign assistance. That comes out of my faith and my understanding that we are to define neighbor as broadly as possible, and where a country with our wealth and development can take less than 1% of its budget and save literally millions of lives. We're called to do so. But again, there's folks who question the value of our, helping the Philippines recover from a typhoon, or helping school children in Angola learn how to read, or fighting the HIV/AIDS pandemic.
Yeah, I share your desire to see America lead on those humanitarian fronts and, when necessary, in military efforts. It does feel to me, though, like there is a shift from just an unease with the Iraq war and even the prolonged engagement in Afghanistan toward a desire just to not even engage the rest of the world. You see this even with Trump's tariffs. It's gone from America as a leader in the world and an exemplar of democracy and free markets and capitalism to the world is our enemy. We're going to hunker down, protect ourselves in a more isolationist posture. And we don't want to be that beacon of light or the city on a hill, as Ronald Reagan used to say. It's a dramatic shift in posture. It is. And that's disturbing. But I really want to pivot to your faith, which you've mentioned. People may not know, unless they're from Delaware, that you are an odd duck in the Senate because you have a law background, but you went to divinity school.
Yes.
So share, if you don't mind, for a few minutes, why you went to divinity school. And without getting into all the details, which I would still be fascinated by, what's the journey from divinity school to the U.S. Senate? Why does divinity school end up in public political service?
So first, I've often reflected on the fact that our founders and framers would not have found this odd at all.
Exactly. You're right. Yeah.
In fact, most of the early colleges and universities in the United States were seminaries that then later added law schools, not law schools that also had divinity schools. Mm-hmm. And it was a challenge to go to both law school and divinity school because the two institutions really, this was not a joint degree. They had different schedules and priorities, and it was really a challenge to do both. I grew up Presbyterian in a suburban church in Delaware. My father was a good, decent suburban businessman who ran a small manufacturing business. My mom was a school teacher, and they raised 3 sons. And I did not realize how much they were teaching by their example until I was a bit older. So I was very active in youth group and Sunday school. And that just sort of formed the foundation of faith in action. My mother volunteered with a group of women at our church to welcome refugees, a refugee family from South Vietnam, who were literally rescued, from the ocean, having fled persecution after the fall of Vietnam, and worked at a homeless ministry, Emmanuel Dining Room, that still serves every day in downtown Wilmington. And my father, for a time, volunteered in prison ministry when we had a visiting pastor ask if there were any volunteers who would go to our state maximum security prison and help with a group of prisoners who wanted a Bible study and fellowship. And he developed a relationship with one prisoner in particular, Paul, who was very disconnected from the rest of the group, very kept to himself, very hard to reach. And my father was a very compassionate, capable person who was a great listener. And he ultimately built a real relationship of trust with Paul. And he started coming home to our home on furlough weekends. He was serving a life sentence for murder. And it was only when I became a parent myself, and there were similar moments where my then daughter challenged me to welcome a homeless person and let them live in our house. And I sort of went, that I realized what my parents had done was something very brave and very out of the ordinary. And that my father and my mother both kept letting their faith break through and push them to take positions and make choices that were not typical. I did not major in religion in college, but my college debate partner, Tom Massaro, is today a Jesuit theologian at Fordham and was a religion major. And we did a lot of, sort of, to say good cop, bad cop is probably a funny way to characterize it. But I was a young Republican frat boy at the time, and he was this, soon to be priest. And we did kind of a Mutt and Jeff college debate routine. I got to law school. I had been working with the Coalition for the Homeless in New York. I was very moved by the challenges and the conditions of people experiencing homelessness on the streets of New York City and other places. And I met someone a year or two ahead of me in law school who was also going to divinity school. And he just grabbed me one day in the dining hall and said, you've got to come listen to this amazing professor. And I went and sat in the back of her classroom and listened to a couple lectures on Augustine, and I was hooked. Sister Margaret Farley of the Sisters of Mercy, a well-known ethicist and theologian, and I ended up taking a whole bunch of classes from her. In fact, I started auditing a lot of classes at the Div School, and someone who was part of my congregation in New Haven came to me after church one Sunday. She was part of the admissions staff, and she said, we do let lawyers go to Divinity School. And I sort of went, wow, I never even thought I could actually get a degree. And I changed my trajectory and sort of really threw myself into Divinity School and training for both hermeneutics and scriptural interpretation, pastoral care, and was seriously considering a pulpit ministry, and wrestled with, I was also volunteering with something called Downtown Cooperative Ministry, which was a homeless ministry in New Haven. And the hands-on practicality of it, being engaged in delivering care and services to people every day, versus a more liberal theological tradition that spent lots of time on interpreting like particular sentences and the seams and trying to discern authorship and that sort of thing. This was not an evangelical school. The inerrancy of the Bible, while broadly accepted, there was a lot of discussion about how each book and verse was assembled from what scriptural sources and what that taught you. So the great thing, and this is a long-winded answer, so interrupt me if it's getting past your level of interest, but the great thing about a divinity school as opposed to a seminary was I had classmates from a very wide range of traditions. A great friend who had gone to Oral Roberts as an undergraduate, another friend who was Catholic, another friend who is Muslim, but coming to the United States to train to be a professor of religious studies, friends who were going into pulpit ministry as Congregationalists and Episcopalians and Presbyterians, and friends who really weren't sure why they were there, but their parents were ministers, or, they came from a long line of ministers, and so they were PKs who were there sort of trying to work out their future. It was a wonderful experience. I left with less certainty than I went in. So if I were to summarize my lessons, humility in the face of the awesomeness and depth of Scripture, humility about the certainty of my interpretation and understanding, and thus a demand or a call to constantly reevaluate and learn. And so an increased certainty about the call and the grace and the mercy and the salvation offered to us by Jesus Christ, and a less absolute certainty about this scripture means this, and we can ignore these, and we have to follow these, which as you get into politics becomes a more pressing question.
It does indeed. I'm intrigued by your story in part because I did study religion as an undergrad, and I debated at length whether or not to go to law school or divinity school, and ended up at divinity school. So hearing about somebody who did both, I'm intrigued by. Before I have to let you go, because I know you have to get to a vote on the floor, I've been talking to some other politicians, including those within your own party, including your colleague, Senator Gillibrand in the Senate, about this. Well, you mentioned it. This certainty is a problem in politics. And that's not unique to one side or the other. But there has been a divide for many years in what some sociologists refer to as the God gap. And Senator Obama at the time, back in 2006, gave a speech on faith and politics where he said Democrats needed to recapture religious ground that they had abandoned to the Republicans. That was 20 years ago. And by most measures, the gap's only gotten wider. So as somebody who seems to chafe against some of the certainty in our politics on both sides and has experienced the humility of faith, how do you think the Democratic Party can do better at drawing religious voters back into its fold? Or what missteps do you look at and think, we need to do better in this area?
So first, look, politics being a human undertaking is obviously at its core a fallen undertaking. I mean, my Presbyterianism is a Calvinist tradition. So, the fundamental depravity of all humanity is sort of one of our foundational, which sounds odd out of context. That's not a way I would introduce myself in a political speech, but we have to be humble about our certainty in drawing conclusions. So, some, I think, of my colleagues, they can quote like two scriptures, right? They can talk to you about Matthew 25 and maybe Micah 6:8 if we're lucky, and that's it. First, I think we have to show biblical literacy. I think we have to make connections between why are you fighting for health care for the poor and the disabled and the elderly? Why are you working for food programs for children? Like, where's this come from? If you can't articulate some connection between a Torah definition of righteousness that focuses on how you welcome the hungry and the foreigner, the stranger, the orphan, the widow, the imprisoned, if you can't draw a line between sort of here's my priorities and what I'm doing, and it's rooted in the Luke 4 passage where Jesus stands up in his home synagogue and says, this is my ministry and my mission. If you can't draw some of those connections, don't be surprised when religious or theologically serious people sort of doubt the sincerity of your engagement. First, second, and I'm just going to be really blunt about this, the kind of liberal consensus in the Democratic Party of the last couple of years focused on identity and grievance. And I have said this for years, mistakenly viewed Black and brown Americans, folks who are from the Hispanic community, for the African American community, as inalterably and fundamentally progressive because they had experienced racism and racially based oppression for centuries. Missing that enduring that oppression largely was possible because of a focus on faith. And so every Black church I've been to in my home state of Delaware, you've got a really powerful, focused, engaged, on fire community that is getting through things that are hard to get through by leaning on the arms. And so not bringing a message rooted in values and in particular in faith, in connecting with communities that have experienced oppression and have transited it by faith is a huge mistake. And nothing offends and annoys Hispanic and Black communities more than treating them as victims rather than as heroes who have transcended oppression through the depth of their faith.
Does that speak to the inherent challenge of the Democratic Party's coalition? Because it does have, I mean, statistically speaking, Black Americans are the most Orthodox Christians in the country. They attend the church most frequently. They read the scriptures more than anyone else. And they're a solidly Democratic voting bloc. But the coalition of Democratic
I don't know how solidly Democratic voting bloc they are.
They have been historically. Yes, they've been losing ground.
They have been historically.
Yes,
absolutely.
but you have that coalition within the Democratic Party, but then you have a lot of white progressives, highly educated white progressives, who are the least religious Americans in the country.
And as long as they're driving our party, and as long as they're defining our message, we're going to lose more voters. If voters think we are more concerned about Latinx or using terms like justice-involved adolescents or people experiencing homelessness, as long as they think the Democratic Party is an academic lounge fighting over linguistic policing, rather than fighting for opportunity for working-class Americans who are struggling to get ahead, they're going to say, And as long as we engage with people in a way that treats them as sort of two-dimensional cutouts, where like we're for you, but we're not with you, and we don't hear you, and we don't share your journey, we're going to keep losing.
Last question, because I know you need to leave. Can you point to evidence that you think the party is getting that message, that it's trying to adjust, that it will be different in 2026 and 2028?
There are certainly several of us trying very hard in this direction. And look, Joe Biden was our last Democratic president. And if there is one defining characteristic millions of Americans knew about Joe Biden that helped them trust him in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, at a time of chaos and uncertainty, it's that Joe Biden endured huge, deep grief twice in his life. The loss of his wife and daughter just before Christmas in a tragic car accident, the loss of his beloved son, Beau, to glioblastoma, a terrible brain cancer. And they knew that in moments of loss and of celebration, he was on his knees praying at Mass. Joe Biden does not talk about his faith much publicly. He's not comfortable. It is personal. It is something that has allowed him to endure. And I think lots of people looked at that and said, you know what? He gets me, because that's how I get through the hard things in life. They may not agree with his exact positions on important moral issues, but they knew that he was a kind and compassionate man, They knew he'd been raised by a family that got through some struggles as a blue-collar, middle-class family in Claymont, relying on their faith. And he went to church more than the 3 presidents before him combined. But it's not a contest. This is not an attendance record. I'm simply saying, is the Democratic Party making progress on this? Well, it depends. I'll remind you, the 2020 primaries were a real fight between the progressive and the centrist. And what catapulted Joe Biden to the presidency in 2020? South Carolina. In South Carolina, the black majority of the primary voters, he won every single county. And that's not by accident. It's because the voters and the people of South Carolina had come to know Joe Biden, and they knew that he knew them. And I think one of our real failings on the Harris campaign, where I volunteered and worked hard, was that we did not share with people that she'd been raised in a Christian household, that she'd gone to church much of her life. On Election Day in Philadelphia, I'm walking around with the pastor of her childhood church, who I'd never heard from and never heard of before that day. And I remember thinking, we need to meet people where they are. And if you want people to be excited about you as a leader of our country, tell us about your journey. Maybe you're evangelical, maybe you're Catholic, maybe you're mainline Protestant, maybe you're a humanist, maybe you're Jewish, but tell us something about how you make hard decisions. And the overwhelming majority of Americans are spiritual. And the overwhelming majority of Americans are uncomfortable voting for someone who they know is an atheist. And frankly, poll after poll shows that. Your average American, and in particular Democrats, don't want to hear you preach at them, but they want to know that in those really hard moments in the middle of the night, when you've got to make tough choices, your family's going through hard times, that you're someone who prays. Yeah. And that you're someone who recognizes the transcendent, and you're someone who sees that of God in others. Yeah, I concur. And perhaps the only thing Americans detest more than voting for an atheist is voting for inauthenticity. Yeah. And so I certainly don't want to see Democratic politicians wear their faith on their sleeve as a way of... You can't fake it, you shouldn't. Exactly. That's worse. You're absolutely right. Exactly. And I hope you're right. Fake faith is worse than none at all. I hope the party, and we see leaders arise within the party who are sincere in their faith and can use it not as a tool to divide Americans, but to unite us. And one of my concerns, honestly, in the Democratic Party right now is, as the Trump administration flounders and makes mistake after mistake, there could be Democratic leaders out there who feel like, well, we don't really have to do anything. Let's just let him implode and we'll be swept back into office, which would be I hope, the wrong lesson to take from this moment. And that we do see leadership arise that can bind this country together with a moral compass and direction and a genuine spiritual core to it that we haven't seen in a lot of our leaders recently. And so I do think, if I might, Skye, and then I really got to go vote. If you think about 3 out of 4 of the last Democrats who became president, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, in addition to Joe Biden, who I just talked about, all of them were not really of Washington. All of them were not well known before they were catapulted to electoral success, and all of them talked comfortably about their faith. That's Jimmy Carter continued to teach Sunday school at his hometown Baptist church throughout almost 100 years, and I think the election of Jimmy Carter was made possible by Richard Nixon. Mm-hmm. And I think Donald Trump, a demonstrably cruel, aggressive, and vulgar president, will make possible the election of someone who champions compassion, decency, and a welcoming and gracious heart, as long as that Democratic leader also makes clear that he sees and cares about opportunity and security for the people of our country. Senator Coons, thank you for your time today. I hope we can have you back on where there's a little more breathing room and we can dive into more of your story and maybe share stories of Divinity School and what we carried from it. But thank you. And we'll be praying for you and all of our leaders in this time where important decisions are being made on global events. Appreciate your presence here on the Holy Post. Thank you. Great to be on with you.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.